Hi everyone, it's Alex, and today I'm here to review Gingerbread by Helen Oyeyemi. Oyeyemi is certainly a writer over the years that is known to sort of draw inspiration from fairy tales and fables, and this is certainly still within that category as this is primarily inspired by Hansel and Gretel. This is a story about a woman named Harriet and her daughter Perdita as they live in modern London, and we know immediately that Oyeyemi is trying to sort of root us in this sort of modern feeling, since there in early pages are mentions of things like Uber and Tinder, and this is certainly, I think, a way to make us draw the differences between reality and this sort of sense of hyper-reality or unreality, as we also have mentioned later within the story. Moments where we have girls throwing other girls in wells, girls making gingerbread shivs, and also talking dolls. I think Oyeyemi certainly knows how to craft this very interesting atmosphere, and more importantly, having her characters match that atmosphere. Although particularly, I think Gingerbread is talking a lot about women, and specifically women in isolation and women being misunderstood. We know immediately that Harriet and Perdita are having a bit of trouble sort of socializing, with Harriet going to these meetings for her school with other parents and talking with them, even to the point of sort of being suspicious of these other parents and sort of questioning them about their children, possibly bullying Perdita to the point where Perdita chooses to gorge on Gingerbread and then induce herself into a coma. And then we have Perdita, in an attempt to make friends, kind of come up with this idea to make cards that say basically, please be my friend, or let me be whatever you want me to be, to which Harriet politely vetoes, considering its very promiscuous undertones. So after this incident with the gingerbread that Perdita eats, since she's so allergic to it that she went into this coma, she wakes up, and then Perdita really starts to question what is the significance of the gingerbread, because it's been passed down as a recipe in Harriet's family for generations. And we really get to the meat of the story, where Harriet explains her whole family sort of lineage and how she got to London since she immigrated there from this very real or not real made up place. And I think ultimately this is really a story about just when we're young, questioning our heritage and where we come from. And I think this story is so important to immigrant families. Sure, it's very fantastical in Gingerbread, but it made me think immediately of my mom coming from the Philippines to live here in the States. And when I was younger, I thought she must have endured this very fantastical and magical way of doing so. And throughout the book, as Harriet explains to Perdita sort of the people she's met along the way to convince herself to go to London, there are also other things we get to know, such as Harriet's friendship with a girl named Gretel, and it's really Harriet's journey of growing up and when we decide to grow up, considering whenever she meets Gretel, Gretel decides that she doesn't ever want to grow up, but Harriet's the opposite, and whether that means growing up whenever we find our first taste of romance, or realizing we lose our first friendship, or also becoming a parent. There are so many different opportunities for Oyeyemi to sort of have the reader become aware or determine their own sense of growing up. Although I think Oyeyemi certainly emphasizes the idea of becoming a parent, or just that really all about family, because whether it be Harriet and Perdita or Harriet and her mother Margot, there's certainly a lot of discussion about what does it mean to have family, and I think Oyeyemi sort of knows that family has its own sort of mythos, where it almost seems magical that each of us, when we think of family, we think of something very specific and unique to ourselves and our own experiences. And when people think of family, they might think of things like family traditions, and that's where the gingerbread sort of cycles back, as Harriet has learned how to make this gingerbread from her mother, and so on and so on. And even as years pass, you can always have that recipe for something you make, and even if you've changed, you know that each time you make the gingerbread, it's likely going to be the same, or whatever you make. But even still, that sort of idea of being in control and making something, there's always that sort of doubt or that unspoken sense of caution that permeates anything that you have control over. And I think Oyeyemi, with that sense of caution, I think it's certainly that giant inkling within Gingerbread in this book that sort of makes me feel uneasy as a reader, that anything can happen, and it gives this sort of strange dreamscape we're given a very nightmarish quality that could turn in any second. My only criticism with Gingerbread, I think, is that despite all these interesting characters we're given, I think Oyeyemi struggles with sort of thinking outside of just the story. And with the characters, while they do have characterization, I don't think they're very memorable. I don't think I'm going to really remember many of these moments with the characters within a few weeks or maybe a month. And I think it's because where certainly Oyeyemi's focused on wanting the most effectiveness of creating this sense of a fable or a moral to the story, that really it draws inspiration so much from those fairy tales like Hansel and Gretel that I think it sort of misses the opportunity to be just as effective with the characters that she's drawing. Overall, I think Gingerbread is a very fun story. It's definitely the right book at the right time for me. I can understand it being very frustrating to a lot of readers. I think you have to be very patient with what Oyeyemi is sort of building up to do, but spotting how sort of drawing inspiration from these fairy tales, it feels just a joyful experience, and I hope people find it a good time to read this book as well. Those were my thoughts on Gingerbread. Please let me know if you plan to read this book since it came out not too long ago, and as always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.